Minecraft holds a special place in the minds of many people. The infinite worlds, the game mechanics, even the creepers, all of these things add up to make the experience we see today. But one thing that is easy to forget is that everything that has ever been added to the game is the result of a decision by a developer. Someone had to decide to add villagers, for example. This simple observation leads to an interesting question. What could Minecraft have looked like if some of the passing comments and brainstorms of the developers ended up making it into the final release? How different would the game be from what we see today? To begin to answer this question, we are going to go back to the very early days of the game. Initially, development of Minecraft was done entirely by a single programmer called Notch. These versions were still very experimental, and they had a looser feel to them compared to the modern game. The community was small, with relatively few people who were aware of what was going on. Notch interacted with the community with a site called TIG Forums, but he would eventually expand to using Tumblr as a dedicated development log. From the very beginning, there were some mentioned features that were ultimately never added. Notch had initially planned on adding several game modes. Survival and Creative made it into the final game, but there were a couple more which were never seen. The first was Team Survival mode, which would have been basically the same as Survival, but with teams of players. The second was more interesting, Fortress mode. Notch describes it. After having built a level in Creative or Survival mode, you and your friends can connect to another fortress made by some other people. The map gets bigger so it fits both maps, and you play a game on this map, perhaps capture the flag, perhaps something else. While many of these ideas would be used by external plugin developers, the idea of combining two worlds into one is a foreign concept to the modern Minecraft player. It's possible that if Notch had implemented this idea early on, there never would have been infinite worlds, as it would have been incompatible with Fortress mode. More broadly, Notch decided against micromanaging the game with many different game modes, instead letting the players do it themselves. The decision to leave gameplay as free as possible is a cornerstone of modern Minecraft. There are several other bizarre nuggets from these early days. For example, originally the difficulty system would have been quite different, with difficulties ranging from Walk in the Park at the lowest level to Armageddon at the highest level, a difficulty so high that it would apparently strain even a group of 32 people. These ideas were referenced later when Notch mentioned the terrifying concept of mega beasts. Furthermore, he alluded to a night of absolute horror, which would be foreshadowed by omens of some kind. One such option was that the moon would turn into a big red eye and look around. While hardcore ended up being added, that surely pales in comparison to Armageddon and the related concepts. But Notch's decision to scrap this idea meant that it would never see the light of day. One weird feature mentioned on the TIG forums was the idea for a tuning fork. If you tapped the wall with it, the fork would tell you how thick it was, thus helping with the discovery of caves. Notch even went so far as to suggest similar prospecting tools, a change that would have adjusted how mining works substantially. Another early oddity was that Notch initially promised that the game could be resold, though this would equate to reselling the account. Nowadays, this is against the terms of service. However, it does happen through backdoor channels, especially within communities who look for rare usernames and capes. This is a much bigger issue which deserves its own video, so I won't get into that here. It was around this time that Notch began to consider expanding the team. He made a post asking for a pixel artist for several parts of the game, including models, terrain, user interface, a logo, and inventory icon design. A few months later, Notch chose Doc as his artist. Doc had been involved with projects such as Roller Coaster Tycoon. For a brief moment, some of Doc's models were implemented into the game. Compared to the blockier aesthetic of everything else, these characters felt a little bit out of place, and it wasn't long until Notch made the call to have them removed. But if they'd been around a while longer, it's possible that they would have influenced the artistic direction of Minecraft in a way that is distinct from the current standard. One could argue that the Doc characters still have some influence on Mojang. Several developers have tiny 2D alter egos they use in videos, including Agnes, Jens, and Vu Bui. Tiny Jens, Tiny Agnes, and Tiny Vu are stylistically much more in line with Doc's characters compared to the normal player model. It's difficult to know if this is a reference, but the similarities make it worth mentioning. Perhaps no mentioned content is more well known than the mob vote losers. I've covered this in several previous videos. For those who are unaware, during Minecraft Live, the community can vote on one of several mobs to be added to the game. While it's nice to have some say on the future of development, one side effect is that losers are unlikely to be added in the future. Some of these mobs probably wouldn't have affected the direction of the game in a serious way. For example, the Moo Bloom from 2020 would have been a flowery cow that would have some relation to bees, but it doesn't appear as though this would have changed gameplay substantially. Another example is 2017's Wildfire, which was to be a stronger Blaze variant. It would spawn in groups of blazes, and while it would have added a layer of extra difficulty to the Nether, this too may have been a relatively minor addition. However, some mob vote losers could have had serious effects. The Barnacle from 2017 was to be a squid-like being that would suck the player down into the ocean using its long tongue. If you think drowned are annoying, imagine this thing spawning throughout the ocean as well. Another 2017 mob, the Great Hunger, would have sunk into the ground, laying a trap with its mouth. Apparently, it had an appetite for enchantments and would consume items. While we don't know what this would have meant specifically, it could very well have transformed deserts into a minefield of mobs that would attack you if you stepped in the wrong place. The Phantom gets much hate, and for good reason, but it's worthwhile to think about how some of the losing mobs might have been equally annoying. But perhaps no mob vote loser would have had as big of an effect as the Glare from 2021. This mob hated darkness and would have alerted players of places where it was dark enough for mobs to spawn. On its own, this wouldn't be a big deal, but during the stream of Minecraft Live, an additional nugget was revealed.
And we are thinking about ideas that in certain circumstances, the glare may even help you light up these areas.
In many ways, this would have been a major paradigm shift, fundamentally adjusting the mining experience. Or maybe it wouldn't have been a big deal, but we'll never know for sure. Now would be a good time to mention the other mobs that lost in votes. In 2018, in celebration of the upcoming release of Minecraft China, there was a vote for which Chinese animal should be added to the game. Unsurprisingly, the giant panda won easily. However, there were 4 losers, including the Chinese alligator, the snub-nosed monkey, the white-lipped deer, and the baiji, also known as the Chinese river dolphin. There were also several mobs that were a part of the losing biome votes. These include meerkats, ostriches, termites, and vultures. However, the biome vote losers will one day be implemented, so at least some of these animals will be added. Votes are one of the most publicized examples of mentioned mobs, but they're far from the only ones. One of the most infamous potential additions was the Red Dragon. In 2011, after the Ender Dragon was released, Notch said on Twitter that he wanted to add an additional dragon to the game. This would have been the Red Dragon, a less dangerous version which wouldn't destroy terrain and could land. It appears as though it would have lived in the overworld and been smaller than the Ender Dragon. Red Dragons were mentioned the following year by Yins, who said in a Reddit AMA that he was still considering how to implement them. Then, in 2013, Dinnerbone released 2 conflicting statements. In October, he said that there were no plans to add a Red Dragon. But just 2 months later, he appeared to leave the door open by saying, "I'm sure one day there will be." But as of the making of this video, that was the last time we've heard about the Red Dragon. There have been other mobs that were ultimately scrapped. In 2012, Dinnerbone mentioned that he was working on a hilarious mob with no clothes. But not even one day later, he tweeted that he had to put his new mob on hold. That was the last time it was referenced, until 8 years later when Dinnerbone confirmed that the mob was going to be a type of pigman who would fight for you and serve as a bodyguard. The reason it was naked was so that the player could decide which equipment the pigman would hold. Such an addition to the game would have had reverberations throughout many areas of Minecraft, from environmental combat to PvP to speedrunning. For the lore people, a pigman servant would have had massive implications towards the interpretation of the player, history of the Nether, and relationships to the ancient builders. If Dinnerbone hadn't had to deal with that old but popular Minecraft suggestion and had instead finished his mob, then the game might be very different today. Some mentioned mobs were eventually added just in a slightly different way. There was once an idea for a camouflaging mob, as stated by Yins during Minecon 2015.
Actually, I wanted to create a kind of complicated block mob that would camouflage itself in the environment. So my idea was that it would attach to blocks and take the texture of the block it was sitting on.
However, Yins mentions that it was difficult to implement, and he later used the idea in a simpler way with the shulker. While the effect ended up being related, it would have been fascinating to have a mob which would change itself to match the world around it, useful for traps or even as a decorative component. There was also a time when spiders were planned to make cobwebs to slow the player down. If this change had been implemented, it would have seriously increased the difficulty of a spider fight. Similarly, there were plans for the Bane of Arthropods enchantment to slow down spiders upon a hit in an ironic twist. These changes would have accomplished something that has never been done in Minecraft, making Bane of Arthropods useful for something. But alas, no such attack was added, and the enchantment remains on the list of things that cause us to break the lectern and try again. There are a multitude of other mobs that received at least a minor mention. These include trolls, reindeer, and soulfire blazes.
I think that's a really interesting idea,
But I really like the idea of making a mob that is somehow connected to the Soulfire.
Notch even joked about adding hamsters at one point, but these are all relatively minor things. There have been some mentions of environmental features that never made it to the game. Not all of these are fun. There's been talk of adding fallen trees to Java Edition. Fascinating. A more interesting change would have been the implementation of the Far biome, an official Farlands biome that was mentioned a few times during the development of Pocket Edition. Some suggested options were much more mysterious in nature. For example, at one point, Dinnerbone implied that he had some sort of plans for the Nether roof. Unfortunately, he never mentioned it again, and there's nothing to do but speculate. Perhaps this has something to do with the briefly referenced Nether pearls, presumably a counterpart to Ender pearls. Another possibility was the addition of vertical redstone. This would have been a drastic change to redstone circuitry, but unfortunately, it never saw the light of day. Some other odds and ends include steel, turnips, a seasonal cycle, and a minecart with a dispenser. If you want to see a more complete list, there's a great page on the Minecraft wiki that details many of these. It's fun to go through it and see all of the strange things that could have been. The development process for any creative medium is fascinating, especially for projects as large and influential as Minecraft. The game as we see it today is the product of many decisions by many people, and it's easy to forget just how different things could have been if some of those decisions had gone the other way. But unfortunately, all we can do is wonder about the Minecraft that never was. As always, let me know what you thought in the comments. You can hop on over to the Discord server. It's a great community and I'd love to hear your voice. What do you think Minecraft would be like if some of these things had made it into the game? Let me know. It's time to start wrapping things up. This has been RGN. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day.